I am now recording.
Okie dokie.
Okay, if we're set, I will start us off. The Constable Hall Association and the Tug Hill Commission are so happy you could join us for the first part of a webinar series called The Constable Chronicles. The webinars will trace the history of Constable Hall, the genealogy of the Constable family, and the family's influence in New York State, and will recount the family members' recollections of life at the Hall. Tonight's presentation tells the story of the construction, renovation, and restoration of Constable Hall, and will be full of facts, fiction, and folklore. If you have questions during the webinar, please put them in the chat box, and we will try to answer them at the end of the presentation. Pay attention, there will be a quiz at the end, and there will be a prize for the first correct answer. I'd like to introduce your presenter for this evening. Martha Constable Murray is the daughter of John Pierpont Constable Jr., who was the last Constable family member to own the hall in Constableville, New York. Martha, otherwise known as Marty, was born and raised in Watertown, New York, graduated from Watertown High, and received a BA in secondary English education from SUNY Geneseo. For almost 25 years, she taught in the Greece Central School District in Rochester and earned an MS in education and an MS in literacy along the way. She honed her English skills and mastered the APA and Chicago editing styles, and for the last 15 years has edited doctoral dissertations, manuscripts, and journals. Marty has presented to various groups in the Rochester area, including historical societies, church groups, the Rochester City Retired Teachers, and the Daughters of the American Revolution. Most recently, she presented at the 200th anniversary celebration of the completion of Constable Hall in July 2019. Her book, Constable Hall: A Story, is available at the Constable Hall gift shop. Rochester has been Marty's home since 1972, but she spends as much time as possible in Sackett's Harbor, where her family has had a cottage for 71 years. And now, without further ado, here's Marty.
We planned that. That was our introduction. Jennifer, thank you for that wonderful but also humbling introduction. It's always humbling to present for my family and about Constable Hall, and it's always very exciting to share information with people also. We can't thank the Tug Hill Commission enough for partnering with us for this series of 3 webinars. And as Jennifer mentioned, tonight is going to be about the hall, and it's going to be about the construction, the renovations, and then the restoration of the hall. I'll be taking you on a verbal and visual tour of a home that was owned by our family for 130 years. For the last 71 years, it's been under the auspices of the Constable Hall Association. So in the true sense of Chronicles, your tour tonight will be a history timeline of the construction of the hall. And it will be filled, as Jennifer mentioned, with facts, fiction, and possibly a little family folklore to keep it interesting. Are you ready to get started? So who am I and what qualifies me to chat with you tonight? Well, I am the 6th generation from the builder of Constable Hall. And as Jennifer mentioned, my dad was the last one who owned it, and he also lived there. You will notice that there are 7 generations listed on my genealogy, and we'll talk about the 7th one in a little bit, but for now we're going to just mention that he was the builder, the father of the builder of Constable Hall. So William Constable Jr. was the one who built the hall. He inherited between 10 and 20,000 acres of New York State upon his father's death in 1803 and decided to build his mansion in what we know as Constableville today. William Jr. had a son, John, and he was my great-great-grandfather. He had a son, James, and he was my great-grandfather. James had a son, John, and that was John P. Constable Sr., and he was my grandfather. And the P stands for Pierpont. And for those of you who've driven 81 on occasion, or you've visited the North Country and meandered in the country roads, you may have heard of Pierpont Manor. And we are related to the Pierpont family on many occasions. Constables and Pierponts intermarried several different times. John Sr. had a son, John Pierpont Constable Jr., and that's my dad. And then you get me. I never lived at Constable Hall. I've been involved and done some volunteering at the hall. As Jennifer mentioned, the book that I wrote about it is for sale in the gift shop. And the picture is actually of me signing at the 200th anniversary last July 2019. So, as she mentioned also, I was a teacher. So there will be a quiz at the end of this, but you will be rewarded with a prize if you get the correct answer. So pay attention and let's get started on our journey together. So this is the driveway that takes you to the hall. And this is the pond that would be on your right as you enter the driveway. We're walking up the front steps, and I want you to take a good look at that crack in the front step. There's a story behind that, and you'll be hearing it in a couple of minutes. Let's take a peek inside. These are but 3 of the many, many artifacts at the hall. Dresses galore and a bas-relief of John Constable. The library on the left with many first editions and Marie Antoinette's sewing table on the right. And this is Casimir Constable and his wife Jenny in the striped blouse. The drawing room on the left, the pantry on the right, and a beautiful clock on display in the drawing room. And now, we'll take a look at the centuries-old garden. So who might this handsome fellow be? Does he look a little bit like George Washington to you? Well, he probably does, because this is a Gilbert Stuart portrait. And as you know, Gilbert Stuart did portraits of George Washington. And the one that probably looks the most like William is the one that's on the $1 bill. William Sr.'s contemporaries were people with the likes of Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr, and the Marquis de Lafayette. William Sr. is the 7th generation that I mentioned earlier, and he was an importer-exporter, and he traded with Southeast Asia, but particularly with China and India. And this map on the right-hand side traces the voyage of one of his most famous ships called the Empress of China. And if you notice, they went down around Africa as opposed to going around South America. And it was deemed that it was safer to go around Africa than it was to go around South America. And I can't help but wonder that how in heaven's name did they know back in the 1700s that it was safer? But somehow they decided that that was it. And so the ships went around Africa to reach Southeast Asia. So William was also a land speculator, importer, exporter, land speculator. And he was involved in the Macomb Purchase. Well, go on back there. Sorry about that. The Macomb Purchase happened in 1791, and it's named after Alexander Macomb, who partnered with William Sr. and Daniel McCormick. The 3 of them purchased approximately 4 million acres of New York State for about 8 pence an acre, which would be the equivalent of, say, 12.5 cents today. The entire purchase was approximately 1/8 of New York State, and it included Lewis, Jefferson, St. Lawrence, parts of Franklin, Herkimer, and Oswego counties. So William Jr. was William Sr.'s son, and William was born April 4th, 1786 in New York City. And he was a New York City boy, went to school in Europe, and stayed at school in Europe until his father passed away. At that time, he inherited land holdings of between 20 to 20,000 acres of land that his father still owned. Now, William was but 17 years old when he made this inheritance, and he came back to the United States, and he finished his schooling at Union College in Schenectady in the class of 1808. He married Mary Eliza McVicker in 1810. Now, Mary Eliza was also from New York City, and she was a New York City gal, born and raised, and William decided that he wanted to build his mansion in northern New York. His father never saw any of his land holdings because he had ill health. He made it as far, we believe, as Rome. But William actually went to the North Country and had a chance to survey some of the lands. And the place that he decided to settle was called Shalerville. Now, William Sr.'s land agent was a Mr. Shaler, and he had been sent about 10 years before William Jr. saw the land. And Mr. Shaler sold pieces of land and managed it for William Sr. When William Jr. decided to build at what was then Shalerville, he and Mary Eliza lived in the Shaler home during the building of the hall. Shalerville eventually became what we know today as Constableville. So there's a story about William's death. He died very, very young, and we believe, or at least this is a piece of our family lore, that we know what happened to William. Supervising the laying of the 10-ton capstone on the front step, and I mentioned to you about the crack in the stone. Just to give you an idea how big that stone was, it took 18 yoke of oxen to drag it. It was 16 feet long, 12 feet wide, 1 foot thick. The story goes that as he was supervising the laying of that stone, that the stone shifted, split, fell, and landed on him. He died on May 28th, 1821, and left Mary Eliza and 5 children to live in the hall. Mary Eliza, this New York City gal, stayed there for 49 years after William's death and raised their children, Anna, John, William, James, and Stevenson. And this is Mary Eliza on the right. So keep in mind that William died at 36 and Mary Eliza outlived him by 49 years. So there's a little maybe discrepancy in the pictures in terms of age, but that a picture of Mary Eliza is a picture that from later on in her life. So we're going to take a look at who owned the hall because that's different than my lineage. So William Jr. built it, and upon his death in 1821, Mary Eliza inherited the hall. And as I said, she lived there for 49 years and raised her children there until her death in 1870. At that time, their son John inherited the hall. Now, John had a son, Casimir. Yes, Casimir, Casimir. And Casimir inherited the hall when his father died. Upon Casimir's death, his wife, Jenny, the one that was in the striped blouse sitting in the chair, she inherited the hall from Casimir. Now, Jenny and Casimir had no children. So upon Jenny's death, my grandfather, who was their nephew, inherited Constable Hall. He took full title in 1923, and unfortunately he died in 1926. At that time, my grandmother inherited the hall, and she held the title until 1936, when she turned it over to my dad. So my dad is the John Pierpont Constable that you see at the bottom. Dad kept it until 1947, and in the interim of those 11 years, He worked, but he also signed up and he served in World War II. He was a CBI, China, Burma, India. And when he came back from World War II, he realized that the hall needed to have something to be preserved in some way other than as a family home. And it was at that time in 1947 that he sold the hall to Harry and Molly Lewis and Grace Cornwall. And they restored it to about the time of when William and Mary Eliza and John and Casimir lived there, so around the 1800s. On July 19th, 1949, they presented the hall to the Constable Hall Association. It's incorporated under the Board of Regents. It's an historic home museum, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. And this is Constable Hall. And if Sean Kernan is viewing tonight, Sean Kernan is a cousin, and this is a picture that Sean took with his drone. Let's talk a little bit about the construction. It started in 1810, and it took 9 years to complete the hall. It's understood that artisans from across New York State came to work on the hall. One well-known one in this area was William Rees. He was from Wales. He was Welsh, and he was a stonemason. And he worked on other stone buildings in the area, but he particularly worked on Constable Hall. The building itself is a federal-style country mansion, and it's believed that it is designed after the ancestral home in Ireland. When William Jr. was studying in Europe, he lived with his aunt, Mrs. White, in Dublin, and it's believed that some of the design of the hall was fashioned after her home. 4 Doric columns are in the front of the hall. And if you look at the 2 wings on either side, there is one over on this side and there's one over here. That's a Palladian style of architecture. And it's similar to Independence Hall, where you have symmetrical wings on either side of a building. On the left of the hall is the chapel and the pantry, and to the right would be the land office. The walls are made of Trenton limestone, which is the geological base of the area. And they were quarried in Talcottville. Yes, that's Talcottville, you don't pronounce the S. And they were drawn by oxen to the hall. The walls are 18 inches thick. There's a 6-inch outer layer and a 12-inch inner layer. I want to point out one little thing that's not symmetrical to you, so you can keep this in mind for something, a story I'm going to tell you later. Notice this window. It's all shuttered. Notice this window. No shutters. Well, it has shutters, but they're not closed. There's a story behind this, and we will get to that in a few minutes. So here we are at the front door. The front door is original. These screen doors, the double screen doors on the outside are not. Above the door, inscribed in the limestone, is the year 1819, the year the hall was completed. The elk antlers were not original in the construction. We believe they were probably added around the 1840s, and that was around the time of the hunters and the sportsmen that were living in and around the hall. If you take a look at the side panels of the front door, there are 13 panels of glass. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And yes, you guessed it, that was in honor of the 13 colonies. The door knocker was a gift from Horatio Seymour. And if you recognize that name from history, you know that at one time, he was governor of New York State. He actually was on 2 occasions, from 1853 until 1854, and again from 1863 until 1864. So let's go around to the back. For those of you who have not been to the hall, surprise, yes, it's 3 stories in the back. two stories in the front, 3 stories in the back. And that's because it's built into a hill. The veranda stretches across the entire first floor of the hall. And originally there were steps off this end and off the far end. And the steps on the far end took anybody who came up on the veranda to the door to the land office. And that was so that anyone who had a debt to pay or had a bill to pay to the family came to the land office through that back door, as opposed to going to the front door of the hall. On this lower level are 2 coal cellars and the kitchen, and what has commonly been known as the Indian room. The Oneidas hunted in the area, and they were offered that room, the Indian room, to stay in for warmth when they hunted. And when they did, they left a portion of their kill, and it was hanging on, they hung it on the pegs outside of the kitchen. So those pegs are actually along here right underneath the veranda. There are 2 outbuildings. One is a carriage house, as you might guess. That's where they kept the carriages. And the other one is the servants' quarters. So originally when the hall was built, the servants lived on the premises. The servants' quarters is very close to the lower level of the hall, so it was easy for them to get back and forth to work. In later on years, the servants' quarters were no longer used because people from the village were hired to work at the hall. So then it was turned into a workshop for Casimir, probably around the late 1880s. Casimir's brother James, my great-great-grandfather, was an architect, and James had a lot of influence on renovations that happened at the hall, and he was very much involved with the design of the workshop for Casimir. So let's take a look inside at some of the construction features. So the animal heads aren't a construction feature, but they certainly were an addition. And again, this is, we believe these are from the hunting era of the family, the sportsmen, particularly John. The lamp hanging in the foyer was a gift to Mary Eliza and William Jr. from the McVicker family when they were married. It's believed that originally the lamp was lit with whale oil. It has since been electrified, so there is a light bulb in it, but originally it was the whale oil. And this is the newel post. And of course, the newel post is just the post on the end of a banister. But the tradition is such that the newel post would be hollowed out, and once a mortgage or a debt on a piece of property was paid, that piece of paper would be put down inside the hollowed out newel post, and then this little ivory and ebony peg would be put in the hole. So we rolled up the rugs to show you the floors. The floors are all made of native spruce, and when they were laid, they were planed so that each board fit perfectly with the board next to it. Same thing with the stairs. And this is going to be important during the restoration also. Up the stairs, there are 4 bedrooms. There's a master bedroom. There is what would be considered a guest bedroom. There is a children's bedroom. And this door right up here would be that 4th bedroom, and that was my dad's room. So taking a look outside, there are shutters on all of the windows, and particularly the ones on the outside were to keep the elements out. And those of you who are familiar with North Country weather know that, yes, it gets pretty rough up here, and you want something to protect you. The indoor shutters are like a double layer. There's a shutter above and there's a shutter below, and they open accordion style. So you could open up either the top or the bottom or both and decide how much light you want to let in, or climate or the elements. Let's see if I can move this. There we go. I need to move me. So the windows are really unique, and I'm hoping you can see this where the arrow's pointing. There's a great big bubble there. And if you look underneath the bubble, you'll see the creases in the windows. This is a very old style of glass. Some of the windows are original, some were replaced during the restoration. Okay, why am I not going down? Let me move me back over here. Peter. Oh, got it. Never mind. Sorry, one of those glitches. So this is one of the shallow fireplaces in each of the rooms in the hall. And I used to think that this was a Thomas Jefferson design. I was mistaken. This is called a Rumford fireplace, and it's named after Sir Benjamin Thompson, the Count of Rumford, who was an Anglo-American physicist, and he studied heat. And he decided that a tall, narrow fireplace was the way to go to get the most heat out into the room. So his openings were tall, and they were narrow to project heat out into the room. And he also did a little different design in that the throat or the sides of the fireplaces are at an angle. And you can see these are angled. And he thought that he believed that also projected more heat out into the room. He started developing these fireplaces in 1795. And they are still popular today. If you go online, you can actually get someone to install a Rumford fireplace for you. This is also the design that's used at Monticello, and I think that that's probably why I had the impression that it was Thomas Jefferson design. On the right is the land office, and this is the view that you would have seen if you walked up the steps to the veranda and looked into the law office. So a couple of unique features about the law office are that over here is a door that leads into the drawing room. And originally that door was metal. And that was to protect the land office from the home in case there was a fire or, you know, some kind of invasion or something along those lines. The other thing that's unique about the land office was this roof, or the ceiling, was filled with sand and sandbags. And the idea with that was that if there ever was a fire, that the ceiling would collapse and put the fire out with the sand. And you can see the spruce floors here in the land office too. And again, they were all planed, so each piece fit together perfectly with the next piece. We're going to take a look at the lower level, and this is where our kitchen is and our cold cellars. The rifle hanging over the fireplace was used by the Native Americans, the Oneidas particularly, when they were hunting in the area. And not only did they get to stay in the Indian room, but they also were allowed to use that rifle to hunt. And behind the fireplace here, in this little cubby, is a dumbwaiter, and the dumbwaiter went and still goes from between the kitchen to the pantry, so that anything that was cooked down here was sent up to the pantry and then served to the family in the dining room. Of the two cold cellars, one was particularly designed to hold food and keep it cool, and then the other one was for wine and dishes. And the approximate temperature in the cold cellars throughout the year was about 55 degrees. So let's look at some renovations now. In the 200 years that the hall has stood, there have been very few renovations. The very first one was for Mary Eliza McVicker Constable. She was a very religious woman, and it was important to her to be able to worship. And of course, the winters up here being difficult made it hard for her often to get to church. Plus, she was a very private woman and really enjoyed her own space. So the chapel was added on to the pantry. So this is actually the chapel. And something interesting to note about this is, so this is the original construction over here. And you can see where the blocks are placed. And you can tell that somebody different added this section on because the blocks aren't quite as uniformly placed. And there's one here, and these don't quite line up as they do over here. So this is the interior of the chapel as it appears today. And what you need to know is when Casimir became the owner, he brought water into the hall and he turned the chapel into a bathroom. So during the restoration, the chapel was turned back into the chapel and looks today very much like it did when Mary Eliza lived there. So the fountain in the front is more of an addition than a renovation. It was added, we think, around the 1880s. And it's a very Victorian style, very popular in France at the time, made of cast iron. And it still works and is operative today. So now my grandfather was an inventor. He worked for Thomas Edison, and he brought some renovations to the hall. One of the things that he added was a furnace. And we also believe that he added a bathroom in the master bedroom, which probably was removed during the restoration. My grandfather also convinced the village to have a water system. We had relatives that died of typhus or typhoid, and he was adamant that this was not going to happen to any of the other family members. So this is the drawing room. And I'm going to point out a couple things for you here. I'm going to try and move my picture over. There we go. So James the architect designed this ceiling, and Casimir liked it. And so this ceiling was put into the drawing room. And looking out the drawing room, this is that window that I mentioned to you that didn't have the shutters closed. Now there is a family story that goes with this. Again, James, being an architect and looking around and seeing things and how they should be, thought that the drawing room was too dark. And so supposedly he started chiseling a hole in the wall and did enough damage to the wall that they had to do something. And so they put a window in there. There is no such window in the dining room, and that is why those shutters are closed. One of the things we did discover when we were looking at the windows and forming the, putting the story together and forming the narrative is that there are no shutters on this, indoor shutters on this window. On the side panels, it's made to look like the shutters, but there is nothing that closes, so that only the exterior ones close. And this is the garden. The picture you're looking at on the left is the oldest known picture of the garden. And the garden is one of the oldest continual gardens in the United States, as it was begun at the onset of the hall in 1810. It's about 1.5 acres, and 1/3 of it is the formal garden, which is believed to be in the shape of the Irish flag. Again, our family came from Dublin. We do have a history in Yorkshire, but our family moved to Dublin and came to the United States from Dublin, and we identify as Irish. There are no original plantings today, but the sundial is still there. And this arrow points to the sundial at the center, and you can see it over here also. Again, James, the architect, was the one who designed the sundial. It's made of slate and granite, and the gnomon is of bronze. And actually, I spent some time in the garden today, and I was looking at it, and I thought, I don't know if I know how to read a sundial, but I looked at it, and I looked at all the little numbers around it, and I looked at my watch, and my watch said 4:31, but the sundial said approximately 3:31. I guess the sundial doesn't do daylight savings. So let's take a look at the garden in full bloom. So restoration, we are coming to that part of the history of the hall. Restoration began in 1947 and ended in 1949. Mrs. Roy Shaver of Lowville campaigned for purchase of Constable Hall. And on December 2nd, 1947, my father received a letter from Harry and Molly Lewis, who are pictured on the left, and Grace Cornwell, Mrs. Lewis's sister, saying that they would purchase the hall and then, quote, present it to love and cherish forever to the Constable Hall Association. It opened to the public July 19th, 1949, 1 year and 1 day before I was born. I had the amazing opportunity to interview one of the men who worked on the restoration of the hall. His name was Gordon Hack, and he was from Beaver Falls, New York. And he actually worked for the Lewises as a painter for 18 years, and he started in 1945. Gordon told me he made 66 cents an hour then. He said they had a crew of 18 people working on the restoration, and they worked from January to June of 47. They worked from 7 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. And those who didn't live locally and couldn't get home stayed at the Hotel Parquet in Constableville. They had painters, plumbers, carpenters, whatever they needed. Many of them were employees of the Lewises and also at J.P. Lewis Paper Company. They heated the hall with salamanders because the furnace wasn't working at that time. So they hand sanded all of the stairs and the spindles and the newel post. And for the floors, remember I mentioned that they had all been planed so that all of the boards fit one right against another. They pulled each board up, but then they numbered each of them so that when they put them back down, that they went back exactly the way that they had pulled them up. The undersides were raw, they were never finished, but the side that you walk on, the upper side, was finished. They also had to hand mix all of their paints to match the wallpapers that were put up. And we've since discovered that there are still manual pigments in the workshop that possibly are remnants of the paints that the renovators had to mix. So there were apparently 3 Swedish men from Haymarket, a father and 2 sons. And their job was to plaster walls and ceilings. And that was a big job because every wall and every ceiling was plaster. Once pieces were restored, they were stored in the workshop, which was rebuilt along with the carriage house at the onset of the restoration in 47. And also, just a little point of interest, as they were doing things in the workshop and doing the restoration out there, they found a 2-holer, which if anybody's not sure what that is, it's an indoor outhouse. They blocked up chimneys to keep birds and other critters from coming down in. And then when they were done with the completed areas, they roped them off so that nobody could get into those areas and destroy, damage, or touch anything that they had already done. Now, I mentioned to you that some of the windows are original and some are not and have been restored during the restoration. When they found a broken window, they took those pieces of glass and they sent them to Pittsburgh Plate Glass. Pittsburgh Plate Glass remolded them, sent them back, and they were able to put them back in the windows. On the exterior, they did a few things. For one of the big things was that they changed the entrance from Route 26 to John Street, the side street out here. And the reason they did that was the original entrance went right through the Constable farm. And they knew that once they opened this to the public that they didn't want a stream of cars going through the farm. So they changed that entrance. They cleaned all the cattails from the pond. And it's at that time there were ducks living there. But today we do know that there are blue frogs in there. So when you get to visit, you need to go down and take a look. I took a look today when I was down there, and something jumped in the pond, but I didn't get a good look to see if it was blue. The roof is a hip roof, and they had to remove all the old shingles and replace those. And I think one of my favorite stories is about the garden. The gentleman who worked in the garden's name was Bunk Keck. And Bunk Keck was Mrs. Lewis's gardener, and apparently he was an arguer. And he would argue at every diagram they gave him that, yeah, I can't do this, I can't do that, but then he would go and do it. Oh, and he bit Mrs. Lewis's chauffeur, Jimmy Barnes. I don't know the story, I just know that Gordon told me that Bunk bit Jimmy. And another little thing about Jimmy was Jimmy only waxed and polished the right side of the car because that's the only side Mrs. Lewis got in and out of. So we're going to go back up to the drawing room for my favorite story about the restoration. Are you ready? So this is the wallpaper in the drawing room. And the story on this was from Gordon, was that each sheet of the wallpaper was so big that it took 3 men to handle it and to get it up on the wall and to get it placed correctly. They also had to wear white gloves so that they didn't leave any fingerprints on it. But my favorite part is that they dubbed it the monkey paper. And the reason they did was because of this little guy over here. If you look at the pattern of the paper, and there's a little one up there, you will see a repeated pattern, and there's another one down there, of, oh, there's another one over here, and there's be another one down there, of these monkeys. And what we noticed as we were taking these pictures was the seam goes right up the back of the little monkeys. So they had to be very, very precise in getting that one little piece matched up on the back of the monkey. I know it's going to happen. Next time you go to the hall, your first time or whatever, or your repeat visit, you're going to go right into the drawing room and see if you can find a monkey. So this brings me to that part where I need to remind you about October's Chronicle, which is going to talk about life at the hall in the 1800s, and the November Chronicle, which is going to talk about life at the hall in the 1900s, and that'll be recollections of my dad and his sisters and what they recall living in Orange, New Jersey when my grandfather worked for Thomas Edison, and also what they recall living up here at Constable Hall. I spent some time today at the cemetery and with my mom, my dad, my grandparents, my aunt, my uncle, Mary Eliza, William Jr., some McVickers, Casimir, James, they're all over there. And it just really spoke to me and told me I needed to speak to you from my heart. As you can see, our mission statement is about culture and education, but we're also about preservation. And I think that this quote from Franklin B. Huff sums up very well what Constable Hall is all about. There are certain duties which the present owes to the future. to transmit in a permanent form for the record of the past, that the memory of the olden times and the names of those who have aided in the formation of society fall not into oblivion. Because it chokes me up every time. We do have a duty to historic places such as Constable Hall, the jewel of the North Country, to preserve and promote their being. I hope you can envision how you can contribute to keeping Constable Hall viable. Whether you visit, take a stroll in the garden, take a tour once the hall is open again, become a member, become a board member, volunteer, have a wedding in the garden, buy a brick, donate to the Veterans Memorial Fund, or join our future webinars. There is a place for you with Constable Hall. Some of you saw my quote today on Facebook. When an elder is gone, a library burns to the ground. Constable Hall is one of those elders, and we hope you will continue to be a part of our story. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope to see you in October. Don't go away. It's time for that quiz.
Great. All right. So if we're ready to do the quiz, I would suggest everybody get their fingers ready to type in the chat. Don't go away. So the first person that answers the question correctly is going to get a pass to the hall. Is that what the prize is?
Yes, it is. You will
Okay.
have a pass to tour Constable Hall when it's open, and we do anticipate being back up and operative in 21. Looking forward to it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So there are 5 questions?
There are 5 questions. We will be handing out 5 passes.
All right. I'm ready when you are.
Well, are our folks ready? How do we know?
I hope they're ready. We've given them their warning, and I think we should let it go.
Okay.
All right.
We're going to question number 1. So get your fingers ready to type an answer. Which constable built Constable Hall?
Okay. We have a winner. Let's see.
Who do we have?
We have a lot of William Juniors coming, but the very first William Jr. was Anna Millette.
Okay, congratulations, Anna.
And thank you everybody for paying attention. Look at all those.
Yeah.
Yes.
I guess I should have said that family members, board members, it wouldn't be too fair, right?
No, probably not.
Yeah. But I think that goes without saying, so.
So William Jr.
Okay, congratulations, Anna. William Constable Jr., son of William Constable Sr. Okay, you ready for question 2?
Let's do it.
Yes, let's do it. How many years did it take to complete the hall?
Oh, Kayla Bagdanowicz. Holy moly. She was the first one in with 9.
Who is that now?
Kayla Bagdanowicz.
Okay.
From Montague. Well, from Montague, but I'm not sure where she is right now.
Montague?
Uh-huh.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Local gal.
Awesome.
You folks are paying attention or taking notes. I'm not sure which it is.
She sure was.
Okay, ready for question 3.
Question 3.
What was the name of the village before it was Constableville? Ah.
Oh.
Ooh.
I think that's Shelley. Shelley, where'd she go? There she is, Shelley Peterson.
Okay.
Awesome.
Congratulations. Did she get it?
Well, I think there's a typo there, but
What was it?
Shaler Bill, but I think it probably was something that would have auto-corrected if it was something else. So.
Okay, so it is Shelley.
Yep, Shelley Peterson.
Okay, congratulations, Shelley. Question number 4, are we ready? What was the original purpose of the workshop?
Oh, all right. Shelly got it first, but she just won one. So let's see. The next person to get it, well, what do you think, Martha? It looks like Gilbert Hale tried to type workers' quarters. It kind of came out a little funky.
I don't see it.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go with Gilbert on that one because I think his fingers got ahead of him.
The workers' quarters or the servants' quarters, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. My fingers are too big for the keys sometimes, especially on my phone.
Especially if you're trying to be first, right?
Yeah. All right, we ready for number 5? This is the last one, folks. Here's your chance. What renovation did Casimir make to the chapel?
Oh, quick one. That was Lisa.
Lisa,
let me get her last name. Oh, where are you, Lisa? Lisa Petke. Am I saying that right?
I don't know. I don't have it in front of me.
Pettke. Congratulations. Wow, there were a lot of right answers. Very fast.
Awesome.
Congratulations, everyone.
Yes. Do we have any questions, Jen?
There is a question in the Q&A. Let's see if I can get this. Let's see. Oh, what do you see there that most reminds you of Grandpa? And that's from Kate Murray.
Oh boy, that's my daughter, by the way.
Nice.
Yeah, that's my daughter. What mostly reminds me of him? The fountain. I have an amazing picture of my dad as a little boy. I'm not sure how old, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And he's standing on the edge of the fountain and holding on to the upper part like this. So he's just being a kid. That is definitely when I think of him, I think of that. In his room, going up to his room. But the fountain for sure.
Awesome, thank you. There was a question from Renee asking if this webinar was recorded for later viewing, and it is being recorded, so thank you.
Then please pass it on and share if you found it interesting.
Okay. There's 2 people in the chat with their hands up. Let's see, Jan Collier and Renee Collar. If you can put your questions in the chat, that'd be great. So let me go back into the chat. And let's see if is the basement, this is from Jane Oakes, is the basement kitchen used for open hearth cooking demonstrations?
It hasn't been.
Okay, so Peter's our curator and owns the cat. And he said it has not been, but it could be.
Okay. And from Gilbert Hale, is the fountain fed water from a source at a higher elevation via gravity?
That's a good question.
Currently, it uses the village water pressure
to
sprinkle. When the hall was occupied by the constables, we are not clear how it generated the head pressure to the fountain. That's still under investigation.
Okay.
There's the pond, and then there's a creek out behind the pond, and we're not exactly sure how they got water there.
Okay, I'm going to go to the question and answer box right now. There's a few questions there. Pam Clark would like to know, was the garden started during the original build or afterwards, and who takes care of it now?
It started in 1810, Pam. Pam's a gardener. That would come from her. And it's basically volunteers at this point who are maintaining it. We have some grant money coming in, which is really helpful at this point to be able to possibly grab onto some blackthorn hedge from Ireland and plant a section of it back in the garden again so people can see what that is like. But it's volunteers. So Pam, if you want to come up north, come out of Florida, come on up north, we can put you to work.
Awesome. Thank you.
There is a very old book in the library dated around 1808, and it has the signature of William Constable Jr. in it. And we believe he used that book as the basis of the garden design.
Can you hear Peter okay? Okay.
Doing great. Don't have dates quite yet for the next webinars. We'll let you know. Tom Voss wants to know, what about a tour of the carriage house? What's in there? What's in the carriage house?
Nothing right now. No carriages. Years ago there was a hearse, but it really didn't have anything to do with the hall. So it's used during arts and crafts fair for, you know, like the pie stand, things like that. It's used for storage. So it's really empty. And the end of it, there are 2 rooms, and those are being renovated and changed over. The one will become the director's office, and then the other one is going to become an information center, so that people will have a room that they can go to and kind of look over some things, so that when they go into the hall, especially if they don't know anything about it, that they'll be able to have some information ahead of time so they know what they're seeing.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Marjorie would like to know, is the hall haunted?
Actually, the Ghostbusters were there about 10 years ago, and they said there might be something, but they weren't too sure what.
Interesting.
I don't think it's haunted, but boy, when I go over there, I feel things, you know. But again, I think some of that's just family and history, and you know, that strength that you could take from a property like that.
A lot of connection there.
Oh,
Sure.
very much so.
Okay, great questions. Rich Bailey would like to know, where is the fountain in relation to the building? Not sure, like if you can point it out from that picture that you're showing right now.
So it's right here. It's directly across from the front door. When this picture was taken, the fountain was covered. So it was taken out of the picture because it wasn't attractive. There was another picture that I showed where you could actually see the fountain there, but it would be right here. Can you see my cursor there or no? I got rid of my little laser here. So it would be right here. Is that better?
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. From Jane Oakes, she'd like to know, do diaries or account books survive from the early constables, which helped with the restoration and appropriate furnishings?
Oh, yes. And there was a furnishings report that was done by a woman by the name of Gretchen Soren. And so that was extremely helpful. We have a lot of diaries, a lot of handwritten documents of people's day-to-day living, you know, and they wrote a lot then. No texting. It was all handwritten in beautiful handwriting.
Fantastic. Here's one from Leona. She's one of our commissioners here. She wants to know, was the night before Christmas written there? And she says, very informative, nice presentation, and thank you.
Thank you, Leona. We're going to follow up on that night before Christmas for you, but what I can tell you was that Clement Moore was a first cousin to Mary Eliza McVicker Constable, the one that survived her husband by 49 years, and he visited the hall. Oh. To be continued.
Aha, that's a teaser.
It is.
Tom Voss would like to know, what were the crops grown on the land, and were there tenant farmers?
Good question.
It was a dairy farm for many decades, so they would have had a substantial hay crop, but also barley, oats, and hops. Hops were quite commonly grown in upstate New York until it was devastated by a fungus. But it was basically a dairy farm, and the grains that were associated with the dairy farm.
They also had turkeys. And I have a turkey story for you when in the 1900s, a story my dad told me about. It involves a turkey egg.
Huh.
It'll be worth it to come back, folks, I'm telling you.
Jane Montgomery in the question and answer box wants to know, do you think the owner papers are in the Newell Post?
Well, that's a good question. And Peter and I have had this discussion, and it's such a fragile artifact at this point. We don't know, if we could take it off to find out. We also don't know if possibly during the restoration, that the ebony piece might have been removed and the paperwork taken out. We don't know. That's a good question, Jane. We've talked about it, but we're just really concerned about trying to pry that little piece of ebony off, because it really wouldn't be a good thing to break that.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to let folks know, it is after 8. We've gone. I understand if you have to leave, if you want to keep it, Martha, if you want to keep going with the Q&A, that's up to you. There's a few more left.
It's up to you.
Barbara Meglis wants to know, are the bedrooms furnished and usually open to the public?
The bedrooms are furnished, and many of the furnishings are original. And when the hall is open, yes, they are open to the public.
Okay.
Not to stay there, Barb. You can't stay there.
Okay. All right, let me go back.
And they're furnished as much as they would have looked like in the 1800s.
Gotcha. Let me ask, I'll get back to Shelley Peterson's questions in a minute, but Sandra Markham made this comment. The hearse had been owned by a local female undertaker, Jeanette Markham Latte, and had been lent for display by my father.
Oh, okay. I never knew that.
Doc
There you
Markham.
go.
Doc Markham, yes.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your commenting on that.
All right.
That,
Shelley Peterson had another question about 'Twas the Night Before Christmas.
yeah, dig it, huh?
Yeah, she wants to know if there's a particular edition that's associated with the hall. Like, she's been giving this as a baby gift, but she'd like to know if there's a specific book that is, related or specific to the hall.
Well, not a specific published one, Shelley, but, and we might show it in the future webinar, there is a handwritten copy of It Was Night Before Christmas in Casimir's handwriting. And we just might put that in a future webinar. So the wordings in that handwritten one would be what we would consider the Constable wording.
All right. Sharing this with others. Yes, we're going to post this. I think it's going to go on. It'll land initially on our YouTube page, and we can share a link with folks if they would like to view it that way. Let's see. And I think that is it for our questions. We've got lots of people saying thank you, and they really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much to Martha and Peter for doing this, and for all of you for joining us.
And come back.
Yeah, come back, and I will reach out. We'll be reaching out to everybody that's on this webinar, and sending out some more press when we get the next few scheduled.
Yes.
So thank you.
Okay, thanks again. And Jennifer, thanks for hosting us. Thank the commission for us too. And we'll see you in October. Spread the word and invite your friends.
Tell everybody. Bye-bye, everybody.
Good night. Safe travels tonight. Just a second. Where's my cursor? Where's my cursor? It went someplace. It's doing some, there we go. Okay, can I get out of this? Bingo.